On today's Locked On Bucks, we take a look at this Eastern Conference matchup with the Washington Wizards. An interesting note on the injury report. Also, what does it mean for tomorrow? One of two remaining back-to-backs the Bucks have on this schedule is just 8 games remain, and I think we got a pretty clear idea of where the Bucks are going to finish. We'll get to all of that and hear from you as well on today's edition of Locked On Bucks.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Bucks. I am Justin Garcia here with you. You can also find my work on the Bucks Radio Network, as you can this evening with the Bucks in DC to take on the Wizards. We always thank you for making Locked On Bucks your first listen each and every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, viewable on YouTube as well. It's all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's Locked On Bucks is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. So the Bucks find themselves in DC tonight to take on the Washington Wizards, and they will do so without Damian Lillard, who we talked about yesterday was already ruled out on the injury reports for this game. Chris Middleton and Giannis, the two big names that are out there for the Bucks, are both listed as probable. So is Pat Beverly, who is still listed as a right wrist sprain, even though Pat may have let the cat out of the bag on the Pat Beverly podcast. But everybody else is either available or listed as probable, save for Jalen Galloway, who is also out. And I've seen some people ask, does this mean anything? Should we be concerned that Damian Lillard is out for a second consecutive game? And not only out, but today it is not out for personal reasons. It is a groin strain that Damian Lillard has been listed on the injury report with, a right groin strain. And look, to me, the simple answer is no. There is nothing to be concerned about. I, for one, am somebody that always has the mindset of I am not concerned until it is time to be concerned, which you could argue, look, by then it's too late. But no, I think the big thing is we've spent so much time already this season talking about, you need Damian Lillard ready and healthy for the postseason. Do you need Damian Lillard to beat the Washington Wizards? Well, you would certainly hope not. No, you should not need Damian Lillard in that case. So it's just a matter of maintaining that health. This is a big stretch for the Bucks, and we may laugh at that, not to continue to beat a dead horse here. I've said this a number of times. This stretch the Bucks have right now may prove to be the biggest stretch on the schedule this season, because this is really where you can put it away. Right now, with 8 games remaining, as we look at the Eastern Conference standings, again, you still have to take care of business your own. The Bucks are in a very, very good spot. I'm not going to go back to the conversations that were taking place around this team moving into the All-Star break, but it has gone in a much, much different direction. So Bucks have a magic number of 6. Bucks wins and losses by those teams chasing them, a combination of the two, to clinch that 2 seed in the Eastern Conference. It was 8 just the other day. So they've gotten that help that they've needed, and they've started to win these winnable games. I'm going to stop short of calling this game in DC against the Wizards a must-win game. I think it's a we hope we win this game. Must-win to me is it's tough to use that for anything short of an elimination game in the playoffs. But look, this stretch, to get back to the original point, the stretch is big because of this. If you go 3-5 in these 8 remaining games that the Bucks have on the season, if you go 3-5, and I don't think that's asking much, to be clear, but if you go 3-5, that puts you at 50-32 to finish the season. I think it's more realistic to say the Bucks are going to win 52, maybe 51 games. But let's just say worst case scenario of those remaining games, you go 3-5. 50-32 is your record. So what that means is the Cleveland Cavaliers would have to go 5-2 in their 7 remaining games. A 5-2 record to pull even with the Bucks And by way of owning the tiebreaker, the Cleveland Cavaliers would win the division and they would finish as the 2 seed in front of the Bucks. The New York Knicks, who have had a tough weekend, losing in a close one to both the San Antonio Spurs on Friday night and then Sunday night to the Oklahoma City Thunder. The New York Knicks do not hold the tiebreaker against the Bucks. So if you get to 50 wins, the Knicks would need to get to 51 wins. So you go 3-5, Knicks would have to go 7-1 to move past the Bucks. So that's why we've continued to say you're in a very good spot here. 3-5 is not a heavy lift. It is not asking much for this team. So to me, that's the bar to clear. If you go 3-5, I think the Bucks are going to be the 2 seed. If you go 4-4, if you go 5-3, it's essentially curtains, because that is a monumental task for the New York Knicks. The fact that they would have to go 7-1 if you go 3-5. Well, if you go 4-0 or 4-4, excuse me, the Knicks would have to go 8-0 to pass the Bucks in the standings. Cavaliers then again would have to get to 51 wins, so they would need to go 6-1 in those final games that they have. And I've mentioned this quite a bit, but that Cavaliers schedule tonight in Utah against the Jazz, any Bucks fan can tell you, look, you think it's easy to play in Utah, not so fast. Then they're in Phoenix tomorrow night, Wednesday night, for a back-to-back against the Suns, who are now thrust into, again, I don't want to use must win, but we really need to win these games from here on out mode to preserve their spot outside of the play-in tournament, or get out of that, I should say. And then they wrap things up with 2 games in Los Angeles, Saturday and Sunday. Another back-to-back there for the Cavaliers. Lakers on Saturday, Clippers on Sunday. They close out the regular season with 3 home games. Grizzlies, Pacers, Hornets. They have a day off in between each of those games. That Pacers game could very well be very, very meaningful. Maybe for the Cavaliers, if they have not caught the Bucks by that point, to say, look, we can still stay off of that 4 seed, and in doing so, try to avoid the Boston Celtics in the second round. And the Indiana Pacers, right now they're tied in the loss column with the Miami Heat for the 6th seed. So the Pacers could be in a spot too where it's coming down to the wire in that final day of the regular season to see who's missing the play-in tournament and who's going to be thrown in there. So that's what the Cavs have. Again, the Knicks ask is a ton. The Knicks are going to have to win that game in Milwaukee on April 7th, this upcoming Sunday, and they're going to have to do a whole lot more after that because of the fact that the Bucks have the tiebreaker. 3 games already separating them in the loss column. It's essentially 4 for all intents and purposes with that tiebreaker. So again, the math is on the Bucks side, and it's starting to become very overwhelming with just another win or 2. That's the spot that the Bucks will be in. I've referenced playoff status quite a bit on this show and on other shows as well. And as we look at the numbers here, as of this afternoon on Tuesday, the Bucks have a 90% chance to get the 2 seed. I think for all those reasons we just went through in terms of, look, even if you just do this, if you finish below 500 in these final 8 games, here's what the other teams would have to do. If you go 500, it's almost impossible for the Knicks to do it. If you go 5-3, it is impossible for the Knicks to move past you. And then it's just becoming a 2-horse race where you've already built up that gap. So while the Cavaliers did start to get healthy, this stretch of scheduling, and look, that's the other part, schedule, how much we have not mentioned that for the Bucks. It was such a heavy talking point by myself, by everybody else, when Doc Rivers starting at the end of January, how much that schedule shifted and how difficult it became from the end of January all the way until about 2 weeks ago, where it started to calm down somewhat for the Bucks. That schedule has not come up at all recently, and they've shifted more towards the middle of the pack in terms of their remaining schedule. So the math, again, is on the Bucks side. That's one component to the equation. The other one is, I've seen some people ask me about, what about this? What about that? Is what does that mean in terms of their first round opponents? Still TBD, because again, it could be any one of a number of teams, frankly. I mean, you cannot rule out any of those teams chasing the Bucks. It could realistically be any of those teams that currently sit 3rd through 8th. The Cavaliers, the Knicks, the Magic, the Pacers, the Miami Heat, the Philadelphia 76ers, who have a big update that we can share and see what it means for the Eastern Conference and what it means for a potential first-round opponent for the Milwaukee Bucks. We'll get into that conversation and take some of the comments that are starting to trickle in on the live show as well. We will get to that as we continue to preview Tuesday night's matchup with the Washington Wizards coming up after the break on Locked On Bucks. Well, this next segment of Locked On Bucks is sponsored by BetterHelp. Sometimes we all need the opportunity to get something off of our chest, big or small. Certain things can really start to get to you. It's important to let that out, especially to someone who's unbiased on your life. So today, I want to say how I really feel about something. You may even be thinking about the same thing this week. To me, that one thing, if you're close to me, you know this. Maybe if you're a casual observer, if you haven't heard me talk about it, you're unaware. I also root for the Chicago White Sox. I am a Brewers fan, but I also like the White Sox. I grew up watching them on WGN, and I know it is borderline illegal to support Illinois teams. And trust me, it is the only Illinois team you will see me lend my support to. But now that we have that out in the open, I think we can all move forward with our lives. Therapy can be different for everyone. Most of us have bigger problems than our favorite sports team or who it's okay to root for. And it's important to get those things off your chest every once in a while. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It is entirely online, designed to be flexible and suited to your schedule. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. And we do want to remind you, Locked On Sports has something else up their sleeves. If you're watching Fox Sports or ESPN and find yourself having to turn down the dial lately, all of that screaming, make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all of that screaming. Locked On Sports today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, and it streams 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Okay, I mentioned some news in the standings, and that is the report that came out yesterday from ESPN's Adrian Wojnarowski that, look, I've been banging this drum as well. I think that's the second time I've used that phrase on this show, but I've been mentioning Joel Embiid's coming back, guys. Joel Embiid is going to be back. I know we can all look at the Sixers and laugh and say, LOL Sixers. I know we've all said we want that smoke. We want to see the Sixers in the playoffs. We want a Giannis versus Joel Embiid matchup, and I want that too. I don't want that in the first round, and I don't want that this season with the way that Joel Embiid has looked. And look, it is fair to say it's a pretty big ask. I don't think we can assume that Joel Embiid is going to be the guy that he was in December, in the first 2-3 weeks of January, where he was frankly a video game and borderline unstoppable. Tyrese Maxey has blossomed into an all-star caliber player. Nick Nurse is the guy, he and Eric Spoelstra, the two guys that have historically diagrammed the defenses that have slowed down Giannis and seemingly given Giannis the most fits all throughout his postseason run and regular season for that matter too. So there are a number of reasons to point to say, look, I know it's going to be a tough matchup either way. You know, there is no such thing as an easy draw in the first round of the playoffs this year, potentially even for the Boston Celtics, who could get the 76ers. They could get the Miami Heat in the first round of the playoffs. So gone are the days where you have the Detroit Pistons in your first round series and you're winning that by an average margin of 20 plus points per game, or the Orlando Magic where you win in a gentleman's sweep, right? Those aren't the days of the playoffs anymore. I think the play-in tournament has changed that somewhat, but you know, for the longest time in the Eastern Conference, you would really just point to the 4-5 matchup and say, well, if there's going to be an upset, quote unquote, it would be here. This is going to be the most competitive series. Maybe we see a little bit of that in the 3-6 series as well, but you're certainly not seeing that in 2 versus 7 and 1 versus 8. That's not going to be the case this year. When you just look at the standings, and we mentioned all of those teams that the Bucks could potentially get in the first round of the postseason, what we know is this: there's 3 teams the Bucks are not going to get in the first round: the Boston Celtics, the Chicago Bulls, and the Atlanta Hawks. As right now, the Bulls and Hawks are tied in the loss column. 36 and 40 are the Bulls. 35 and 40 are the Hawks. But that's 5 games back of Philadelphia, who currently sits at 8. 5 games with 6 to play is not happening. So 9 and 10 is going to be the Bulls and the Hawks, with the seeding there to be determined. And I point all that out because if you're the 2 seed, you can't get 9 or 10. Those 2 teams can only get 8. So the winner of that game is alive, the loser is eliminated, and the winner of that game then has to beat the team that lost in the 7-8 matchup. So you can cross those 2 teams off their list, and that's, again, one of the reasons why we said could be any one of those teams: Cavs, Knicks, Magic, Pacers, Heat, Sixers. It is very likely going to be either the Indiana Pacers, the Miami Heat, or the Philadelphia 76ers. And I do want to open this up to the audience, and maybe we'll make it a poll question as well. Once we have a clearer picture of the rest of the seeding, who you would much rather avoid and who you would much rather have in those 3 scenarios for a first round matchup for the Bucks. But my thoughts are clear, and I've said this for weeks now. If I can choose one team to avoid, it's the 76ers. If I could choose one team to play of those 3, it's the Indiana Pacers. But I do think there isn't a bad thing for the Bucks to adopt the mindset of saying, look, we're playing to win, right? We want to win games going into the playoffs. We want to continue to turn the corner and piece things together, as much as we love to throw those comparisons back to 2021, the same way the Bucks did in 2021, where they're starting to play a lot better down the stretch. And again, as we came to find out after the fact, put it to the vote behind closed doors. Who do you want to play? Well, how do you want to approach this? Should we rest? Should we play to win? What if we get the Miami Heat? Does it matter to us? And as a team collectively in the locker room, they all said, no, let's play to win. We don't care who we get. And frankly, we kind of want the Miami Heat because of what happened in the bubble, some September, I believe that was, late August. So 10 months earlier in the postseason, 9 months earlier, with the way that that's those 2 seasons kind of bled together. And look, I think it should be the same approach if you're the Bucks. Not to keep going back to 2021 and trying to look for all the similarities that we can, but I do think that would be a healthy mindset to say we don't care who we get, and frankly, we want the Miami Heat. That being said, 76ers to me are the team I would keep off the list. Now, it does appear that Joel Embiid, as Adrian Wojnarowski reported, his return is imminent. He had said there's a chance that Embiid could return as early as tonight when the 76ers play the Oklahoma City Thunder. As of the latest update to the injury report, Joel Embiid is still listed as out. So it does not seem as though Embiid is going to be making his return tonight. And again, for Philadelphia, there is still a chance that they could get up to 6th. I think if you're the Bucks, that would be an ideal scenario. If Philly finishes 6th, this is assuming you finish 2nd, and the play-in game is the Pacers and the Miami Heat, right? Ideally, the play-in game in that 7th spot is the Magic and the Indiana Pacers. I just don't see that happening given what the Magic have left in terms of their schedule and the fact that they're already 2 games clear of the Miami Heat in the loss column. They're 4 games clear of the Philadelphia 76ers in the loss column. So everybody has said, man, I'd love to play the Magic. And I'm with you because of a young team, not a whole lot of postseason experience. Yeah, you got Joe Ingles and Gary Harris Jr., not a whole lot outside of that. And especially for Jamal Mosley, their head coach, who has been in the postseason before, but not as the guy wearing the whistle. Not to mention it's an offense that has shown some struggles scoring the basketball, even with Paolo Banchero and the Wagner brothers. They're a defensive team. And it's all about building on confidence, continuing to increase the way that the Bucks are playing on that side of the floor. I talked over the weekend about Malik Beasley and some of the growth that we've seen from Malik. And one of the traits that could be most important for Malik Beasley in this postseason is that mindset that he's brought, right? And look, I get it. If you watch the Lakers in the postseason last year, we talked about it earlier this season too. Malik Beasley did not play for the Lakers in the playoffs last year. So I'm sure that's going to be hanging over the head of a lot of Bucks fans thinking, well, wait a minute, is this going to change once we get to the postseason? And frankly, it might. Not that Malik Beasley is going to be removed from the rotation because the Bucks don't really have any other options, but it is one thing to keep in the back of your mind. But I think we saw this over the weekend in that game in Atlanta. We've seen it a couple of times this season, the Minnesota Timberwolves game that the Bucks won on the road. What's most impressive about Malik Beasley and should get more recognition, and I think Bucks fans have been quick to recognize and point this out, is regardless of the struggles that Malik may be having on any given night, shooting the basketball, he was having those in Atlanta against the Hawks. He still remains active defensively and committed. There are shortcomings. None of us are disputing that. But the big part of defense, or one of the big parts of defense, I should say, is buy-in, right? You got to know where you're going to be. You got to know where the help is coming from. You have to be assignment sure. You have to know what move comes next. With that, you need the reps and you need time. And you need reps with those teammates, especially as you incorporate things like zone defense and switching. But you just have to bring it, quote unquote, defensively, for lack of a better phrase, right? You have to be active. You have to be engaged defensively. And I do think Malik Beasley, if he has been one thing this season, he has been engaged and committed defensively. So to see him stick with that, even on nights where he's gone through shooting struggles, and not only that, on nights when he's had those, I've referenced that Timberwolves game. He did the same thing against the Hawks. He's still come up with some of the biggest shots of the game, or baskets of the game in the case of Minnesota down the stretch. So to me, that is a very encouraging thing moving into the playoffs. And if we're being real, the Bucks are going to have to outscore teams in the playoffs. This defense, I think it'll be aided somewhat by the fact that things do slow down in the postseason. There is more physical play. I think that'll help the Bucks, as Doc Rivers has really preached, and a lot of this has been offensively that he's been speaking to. But the Bucks do have to be the more physical team. But I do think that's going to help out the Bucks somewhat in the postseason. Is that going to take the Bucks from league average to elite? Certainly not. But you got to take all the help you can get in the postseason. The big thing, though, is you can't be a liability, right? And we've heard a number of coaches speak to this. Doc Rivers has kind of tiptoed around using that phrase. Darvin Ham specifically said it when the Lakers were in town a week ago, that, look, you just can't be the worst out there. I don't care if you're the best. You can't be the worst. You got to know where you're going next. You got to know what you're doing. Just don't be the worst guy that's out there. As long as you can get that and you get those shifts in the way games are officiated, you're going to have to outscore teams. I know we've mentioned the Damian Lillard component with free throws and how that's really changed the last couple of weeks. That is something to keep an eye on. But I think there's more confidence the Bucks can outscore those teams because of what their half-court offense has resembled under Doc Rivers. Again, against the best teams in the league this season, the Bucks have been in the top 5 in half-court offensive efficiency, and that's the caliber of competition you're going against in the postseason. It's what the Bucks fell short of year after year after year after year, even though they did get a championship in 2021. It was not because of the offense and specifically the half-court offense. We'll take a look at some of the big games because there are quite a bit this week, and some of them are on the schedule tonight. We'll take a look at the rest of those games besides just the Bucks and the Washington Wizards game as we continue to get you set for, don't laugh, but another big matchup for the Milwaukee Bucks this evening in DC. We'll get to that conversation coming up after this on Locked On Bucks. Well, I've talked before about some of the frustrations that I've had on road trips I've taken. I was in Detroit over the summer, ran through one frustration after another when using a ticket buying service. I'd never been in the city before. I wanted to take in a Tigers game, wanted to see what else I could do all before SummerSlam. And I just ran into roadblock after roadblock. I bought tickets from one site, never even got them. Had to go to the box office, buy a second pair of tickets, had to wait 2 months to even get a refund. Well, I'm here to tell you, If I would have used Game Time, I would not have run into any of those issues. Game Time is now an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch of the game. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, you can even see views from your seat and their lowest price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying Major League Baseball tickets. Last-minute tickets, flash deals, zone deals, and again, what is most helpful, that view from seat, especially if you're like me, you're in a city you hadn't been to before, you're at a stadium or arena you hadn't been to before, you don't know what any of the sections mean or what areas to avoid, what areas you're going to be obstructed by. You can eliminate all that with Game Time when you see the view from your seat. Get those last-minute ticket prices, all the deals that you are scouring for. Save up to 60% off buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. The lowest price guarantee means Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference if you find those seats cheaper elsewhere. Your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. All things I wish I would have had in Detroit. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA, LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and it is now available on Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today, here for you 24/7, covering the top stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows that get into every single league. All of the Locked On, enter your team name here. I don't want to draw any more criticism, but covering and following your favorite baseball team with opening day just last week and the sports-specific channels as well. A lot to dig into. Opening week or weeks of Major League Baseball. The NBA playoffs around the corner. The NHL playoffs around the corner as well. So Locked On Sports Today, your place to catch all of that. All right, so in terms of games that are on the schedule tonight, there's a lot of big games this week, but especially tonight. That Bucks game against the Wizards, we obviously know the importance. Win and continue to shrink that magic number, make it even more difficult, as we laid out at the top of the show, for the Knicks and the Cavaliers to catch you. Speaking of the Knicks and the Cavaliers, and here's where the Bucks can take one giant step towards really locking up that 2 seed tonight. You beat the Wizards, a game you frankly should win. The New York Knicks are in Miami against the Heat, and just as we said with the Pacers trying to win and stay out of the play-in tournament, Miami Heat have to win to keep the pace, literally and figuratively. The Pacers won last night. Heat got to win tonight to not drop any further back of Indiana in the standings and get locked into that spot where, look, we're in the play-in tournament. They host the New York Knicks. That is going to be a challenging game for both teams. And as we mentioned, the Cavaliers are in Utah against the Jazz. In the West, you've got some very, very intriguing matchups as well. The Dallas Mavericks, one of the hottest teams in the league, not just on this recent 7-game win streak, but really since the trade deadline, what they've done with those new pieces. Dallas has jumped all the way up to 5th in the Western Conference. They could catch the Clippers and get home court in a 4-versus-5 matchup, or it could become the Mavericks and the Pelicans in the first round. So Dallas has been on a tear lately. They've got a big game tonight against the Golden State Warriors, who also need to keep winning to keep some separation between themselves and the Houston Rockets for that final spot in the Western Conference play-in tournament. Nuggets and Timberwolves and Oklahoma City Thunder, they all play tonight as well. All 3 of those teams separated by just 1 game at the top of the Western Conference standings. So long story short, and the Clippers and the Sacramento Kings too, I should mention that, as we just mentioned, the Dallas Mavericks can catch the Clippers. Sacramento has just been dealt injury after injury. They're just 2 games up on the Lakers in the loss column in that 8 versus 9 line. And again, we went through it a little bit when we took a look at the Eastern Conference play-in tournament. But the importance of that is if you're on that 9-10 line, you have to win twice to get into the playoffs. One loss means you're out of it. You got to win the 9-10 game, and you got to win the next game. If you're on the 7-8 line, you got one free pass. You can lose and win your next game and still get into the playoffs. So we got a handful of big matchups on the NBA schedule tonight. It is going to be this way probably from here on out, just looking ahead at the rest of the schedule. Of course, the Bucks play tomorrow at home against the Grizzlies, starting a 5-game homestand. Cavaliers also play tomorrow in Phoenix against the Suns. The Pacers play tomorrow against the Brooklyn Nets. Again, you have the Thunder and Timberwolves both playing tomorrow. You have the Magic playing to see if they slide or move up in the Eastern Conference standings. And they got a tough matchup with the Oklahoma City Thunder. So we have tough game, big game after big game on this upcoming schedule. Thursday, by the way, 76ers are in Miami. The Kings are in New York against the Knicks. So it is a week, I should say, packed with very, very big matchups to keep an eye on. But the long story short, and the final point on this show, if you take care of business against those teams, this stretch that the Bucks are in, I know it includes a back-to-back. You did it against the Atlanta Hawks. If you can do it again tonight against the Washington Wizards, if you can do it against the Memphis Grizzlies tomorrow, as Doc Rivers said, we've been pretty good in revenge games. That fits a revenge game, the way the Bucks lost that final game before the All-Star break. And then the Toronto Raptors, who have nothing to play for. These are games, you win those. As we just mentioned, if you go 3-5, what that means the Cavs and Sixers would have to do, those are 3 wins right there. So you could go 0-5, and you're still in a very, very favorable spot, not counting anything that those teams do. So that's why it's a big game. As much as we may look at the standings and laugh, that's why that's a big game for the Bucks tonight, tomorrow, and Friday against the Toronto Raptors. Speaking of tonight / tomorrow, Camille and Frank will be back with the post-game recap of the Bucks and the Washington Wizards. Same story tomorrow night as well. Camille and Frank will recap the matchup with the Memphis Grizzlies. Camille and I will be back on Thursday to take a look ahead, Friday, to take a look ahead to the weekend and preview that matchup with the Toronto Raptors. Thanks to everybody for tuning in. I promised I'd get you out in time to take in opening day for the Brewers. Talk to you once again tomorrow with more Locked On Bucks.